Hi, this is Denise Mathew, and welcome to the second installment of The Energy of Emotion. Last time we talked about what a solar plexus was, the general difference between being emotionally defined and undefined, and a brief description of what an emotional wave was. Today, we'll go deeper into what it means to be open emotionally. We'll talk about the strategies you can use to get the best in life, and a little bit more about what it means to have an open solar plexus. With that said, let's get started and discover a little bit more about the energy of emotion. Just a quick review to say that in human design, all centers have specific colors that designate that they are defined or undefined. When a center is defined, it means there's a complete channel that connects the centers. All channels in human design consist of two gates that come together to form a channel. And one more thing, when a center is defined, it always has a specific color. So it doesn't change. The only way it will change is if it's undefined, and then it will be white. So for instance, the ajna will always be green, the head will always be yellow, and so on. And if they're undefined, they'll always be white. So it's a good tip to remember when you're looking at a body graph. So when someone has a defined emotional center, it means that there is a channel connecting the emotional center to one of four specific centers, which are the will, the sacral, the root, or the throat. In fact, the emotional center is also a motor. So in that way, in human design, if you have a defined emotional center, it's always going to be motorized or energized, and you will have what's called an emotional wave. So when we look at a body graph, we can see there are two ways of being. One is when the center is brown in color, and the other is when it's white. So like I said, it's easy to tell if someone is emotionally defined based on their body graph. And one more piece of terminology is that when we talk about something being defined, we can interchange it with the term closed. And when something is undefined, we can also call it open. According to the Jovian Archives database, the divide between defined and undefined is almost equal, with 46% being defined and the other 54% being undefined. And what this means is when you're open emotionally, the chances that you know or love somebody with a defined emotional center is probably pretty high. Since living alone forever, separated from people with emotional waves, is probably something we can't do, and wouldn't even if we could, let's talk about some strategies for coexisting in a way that you feel comfortable and not overwhelmed by the emotional waves of others. So now that we know what it means to have a defined solar plexus, let's talk about what it means to have an open emotional center, and how you can learn to interact with and also understand the emotional energy from those around you. When a center is undefined, including the solar plexus, it means that it's less fixed, or in other words, the energy is more fluid. So when you have an open solar plexus, your way of experiencing emotions is exactly opposite to someone who has an emotional wave. And it's less about something that you're generating and more about an energy that you're absorbing. Another thing to understand is that this energy is always coming from those around you with defined emotional centers. And how that energy shows up depends upon where they are in their own personal emotional wave. A lot of people talk about being an empath, but in human design, the true empaths are the people who have open emotional centers. An empath is considered someone who can actually feel the emotions of others. So for this reason, when you have an open emotional center, you can feel more peaceful away from the fray of life, and equally swept away by emotions when you're in a crowd. And not only can you absorb emotional energy, but like any other open center, when you take in that energy around you, you can also amplify it, like high definition speakers on a stereo. And for this reason, people who are undefined emotionally may consider themselves to be highly emotional or deep feelers. And while that may feel like that's the case, sometimes when you start to learn the difference between your energy and the energy of those around you, you might start to feel a little differently about how you process things emotionally. Depending on the emotions of those around you, having an open emotional center can be considered positive or challenging. Riding a wave of elation may feel amazing, but the opposite can be true when you come in contact with a lot of toxic or negative emotional energy and it descends like a black fog all around you. Highs and lows are part of normal life, but by understanding your unique configuration, you can begin to navigate your emotions and get a feel for what's yours and what's not yours. When you understand how you operate, you can allow yourself to be emotionally triggered by people, or alternately, you can unhook from the things that in the big scheme of life don't impact you. And since we all come equipped with our unique experiences of emotional energy, how you react to it can be affected by your conditioning or the influences from the people that you spent the most time with or spend the most time with. By looking at the charts of those around you, you can see the influences that affected you in the past, as well as those that are affecting you in your current circumstances. So we already know that somebody with an open emotional center always has an undefined center, or it's white in color. But in human design, we can add another dimension that makes it more individual to your specific configuration. And it's in relationship to the gates that are defined on the solar plexus, or in other words called the hanging gates of the solar plexus. Now, some people will have emotional centers that are completely open, and other people will have emotional centers that have almost every gate defined. But normally, for the most part, most people are somewhere in the middle. Also, every one of your hanging gates are electromagnetically searching for the match to the gate that you have, so that a complete channel can be formed. I'll talk about that more and how it works a little bit later. One of the most common misconceptions about people with an open emotional center is that they don't have feelings of their own. While in theory that may feel like it's true, we have to remember that emotional energy is absorbed and begins as one type of energy, but when it's absorbed by a person with an open solar plexus, it becomes more personal to them and is unique to their configuration, meaning their gates. The gates or hanging gates, also called half a channel, can give the emotional energy that you absorb a personal flavor. So based on the gates you have defined, you might have a more fixed way of experiencing the emotional energy from those around you. It doesn't constitute an emotional wave where there's a definite pattern of emotion, but instead can be a reaction to the emotional energy that you find all around you. And that's why it's important to know what's yours and what isn't yours, so you can ride the emotional waves you want to and unhook from all the rest. Getting back to the idea of electromagnetics, another way that someone with an open emotional center can be affected by emotions is by the connections they have with other people. So even if you're in a relationship with someone who is open emotionally, there's potential that your hanging gates will connect to their hanging gates and form a complete channel that will define the emotional center. And in the relationship, there's potential for you to experience an emotional theme. So for instance, if someone has a hanging gate 22 and they're in a relationship with someone with a hanging gate 12, then the individual channel 1222 can be formed in the relationship. The 1222 channel comes with an abundance of creative energy, but the wave can also have periods of extreme highs and periods of extreme lows. When this connection becomes part of a relationship dynamic, it can be the energy of a deep love and connection, and alternately can induce passionate and explosive interactions. And because of the nature of electromagnetics, the only way to diffuse the situation is by breaking auric space, in other words, separating and taking time for decompression and releasing of the emotional energy. Powerful interactions can also happen when there's a combination of someone who's open and someone who's defined. Here is a composite chart of Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson, a couple who had a famous, tumultuous relationship. Tommy Lee has the individual wave 3955 defined, meaning he can have extreme highs and extreme lows. Because of the amplification of the energy that I just talked about, someone like Pamela Anderson who's open can absorb the emotional energy from Tommy Lee, amplify it, and volley it back with a force that is 10 times the intensity of what was sent her way. In that way, emotional interactions can escalate to a breaking point rapidly, and once again, breaking auric space and allowing for some downtime can save people from saying or doing things that might have felt right in the moment, but also there's potential for them to do things that they would have regretted after they had a cooling down period. So for this reason, knowing this dynamic can potentially help many relationships, especially those relationships where there's potential for passionate interactions between them. And if you want to find out more about how electromagnetics work, you can check out the video I did all about electromagnetics in relationships, and I'll leave the link below. When we talk about having an open emotional center, we can talk about having a natural state of being where feelings and emotional energy aren't first and foremost in your life. So what that means is that it's like, for instance, if you have fair skin and you're sensitive to sunburn, you'll always be aware of the sun, how much exposure you're getting, if you need to apply sunscreen, and all the things you need to do to go outside. But if you have no issues with sensitive skin and the sun doesn't really impact you, then you're not going to be hyper aware about the sun. In fact, you'll experience how it feels on your skin, the warmth, and all the sensations, but it's not as important to you since there's little impact on you as an individual. Now, if you're a parent who has no issues with the sun, and you have a child who's very sensitive to the sun, and you take them to the beach, then suddenly the sun has more impact on your life, because now it affects your life in a way that it didn't before. But that doesn't mean it has to be a huge deal. By taking the precautions and preventing your child from getting a sunburn, you can still enjoy your day at the beach, or on the other hand, you can make it a huge deal where instead of enjoying the day, you get so wrapped up in trying to make everything perfect, you forget to have fun. Emotional energy, just like a day at the beach, can be wonderful or horrible. It's all in how you manage your reaction to it. There are a few more details about having an open emotional center that can be crucial for getting the best emotional experience possible. One is that the emotional center can be like a sponge, soaking up emotional energy until you're beyond saturated. So it's important to wring out your sponge and come back to natural state whenever you can. Based on theory, the way that this is done is by being alone and lying down for about 15 to 20 minutes so you can dispel the energy. And since human design is all about experimentation and finding out what works for you, it's important to discover what works best for you. Some people might use yoga, meditation, or physical activity to release the energy. No way is right or wrong, and whatever method you use depends on your own needs. When you find the best method or methods for you, then you can add another tool to your self-discovery tool belt, and it will be one more way that you can understand your unique way of being. And one last way that someone with an open emotional center is different from someone with a defined emotional center is that when they make a decision, it should be in the moment rather than waiting to mull it over. In fact, anyone who's undefined emotionally is meant to act in the moment and accept or reject an invitation, an offer, something they want to initiate, or something they want to respond to. Yet the first instinct for most people who have an open emotional center is to wait. And because of this, many people with open emotional centers lose out on opportunities. So maybe you want to apply for a job, and in the moment it feels good, but instead of jumping on the opportunity, you wait until the next day to apply. And then you see that the job posting is gone. So usually someone with an open solar plexus or emotional center have many stories of times when opportunities slip through their fingers. Now, this doesn't mean that you should grab everything that comes your way. What it does mean is that if you get an internal hit, a gut response, an inner voice, also called your inner authority, or something that says it's right for you, then it probably is. That's why it's important for someone with an open solar plexus, anyone for that matter, to get in touch with their inner knowing and to understand how it operates for them. Because since we're all individuals, we operate in our own way. If you're interested in finding out more about your own specific inner authority, you can check out my video on inner authority, and I'll leave the link below. Having an open emotional center can be a wonderful way of being, because when you start to pull apart the energy and see what's yours and what's other people's, you can start to partake or not in the emotional energy around you. You can get lost in the enthusiasm of a music concert or completely detached from a heated interaction of a couple sitting a few feet beside you in a restaurant. And one more fun fact is that it's no mistake that some of the greatest actors, entertainers, and musicians are open emotionally. Because once you get the skill down pat, you can learn to dip into the emotional wave of others at your leisure and get right back out as soon as you want to. So that's all I have for today. Please be sure to tune in to the next installment of The Energy of Emotion, where we will start to learn about what it means to be defined emotionally, how all emotional waves are not made the same, and how by knowing your unique way of being, you can begin to see the beauty and rightness of your particular design, and especially that being authentically you can be the most freeing part of being alive. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon.